Well, the story of the protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act have perhaps been best told through the protests in Delhi's Shaheen Bagh. For almost 30 days now, the protesters, mostly women, have sat peacefully, voicing their opposition to the law which gives citizenship to persecuted minorities from Pakistan, Bangladesh and Afghanistan, except Muslims. These are women of all ages, from 18 to 80. They sit here night after night for several hours, braving Delhi's cold winter, the coldest in more than 100 years, in fact. Many have no place to leave their children, so they bring them to the protest site instead. While it is the Muslim women of this neighborhood who are part of the relay sit-in protests, support pours in from all communities. On Sunday, for example, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs and Christians all performed rituals at Shaheen Bagh and read out the holy books of their religions together. Sanket Upadhyay has more.
The protests show no signs of ending. In fact, it's 9 o'clock and you can see this drill has begun over here where volunteers on their own, they get these food packets. You can see, ek second dikhaiye. You can see that they get these food packets. They get these disposable water bottles right here to be distributed among all those people who are gathered here who are protesting. 30 long days where women, elderly, young, housewives, working women, all of them staying in the vicinity, and also others who are coming here in solidarity, continue to spearhead, continue to be the focal point or the fulcrum of this agitation right here in Shaheen Bagh. A couple of things that they said, Nidhi, and I would like to tell you this. I came here 15 days ago, and that juxtaposed with what they said or told me today, it appears that there is a constant in what they want, and that constant is something which has not been heard by the government. The constant over here is the word called dialogue. They want dialogue with the government. They feel that it's not some great fun sitting here in the cold in large numbers, and also the fact that in solidarity there are similar protests that are breaking out across the country. It's also a great inconvenience, they realize, with some of the shops shut over here and also this road which has been shut for the movement of traffic. They do realize that this is great inconvenience to all, great inconvenience for all. But they want their voice to be heard. They want dialogue with the government. And that is one thing for the past 30 days that has not happened. They feel that no representative from the government has ever come to understand what ails them. They feel that if the government says that there is misconception being spread among the people over here, then an effort needs to then be made by the government to tell them the right thing, to tell them exactly what is going to happen. I asked a lot of supporters over here that the government says that NRC has not been implemented. So why the protest? Why this fear? If something that does not exist, why the fear? They feel that the government has often changed its position on NRC. First of all, they said chronologically that it is going to come. And now the government says that there has been no such discourse. They feel that there is a trust deficit. And all of this can only be rectified through dialogue. It's back to you in the studio.
Thanks very much, Sanket. And that perhaps is at the heart of these protests for many people, for many students and ordinary folks who just want someone in the government to be listening to them and to reach out to them. But that doesn't seem to be happening at all. Meanwhile, today, Bengal's BJP President Dilip Ghosh said that those involved in damaging public property in these protests should be shot like dogs, which is how he described police actions in other BJP-ruled states against protesters. Union Minister Babul Supriyo later said, rather, he looked embarrassed when he said that these were not the BJP's, the party's views.
এই যে অনুপ্রবেশকারী 1 কোটি এখানে আছে তারা কার পয়সা খাচ্ছে? তারা আমার পয়সা খাচ্ছে, আপনার পয়সা খাচ্ছে। তারা যে রেল ট্রেন পুড়িয়ে দিচ্ছে, লাখ টাকা নষ্ট হলো, কয়েকশো কোটি টাকা, 500-600 কোটি টাকা নষ্ট হয়েছে খালি পশ্চিম বাংলায়। কারণ এখানে একটা গুলিও চলেনি, একটা লাঠিও চলেনি, একটা এফআইআর হয়নি, দিল্লির পুলিশ কাউকে অ্যারেস্ট করেনি। কেন করেনি? ভোটার বলে কিছু করছেন না। আর দেখুন আসামে, উত্তরপ্রদেশে, কর্ণাটকে এই শয়তানদেরকে আমাদের সরকার গুলি করে মেরেছে কুকুরের মতো। তুলে নিয়ে গেছে, আমরা কেসও দিয়েছি। এখানে আসবে, খাবে, দাবে, আর এখানকার সম্পত্তি নষ্ট করবে। জমিদারি পেয়েছে নাকি? লাঠিও মারবো, গুলিও মারবো, জেলে ঢুকে রাখবো। তাই করে যাবো না সরকার। মমতা ব্যানার্জির মুরদ নাই কিছু করার, খালি ভাষণ আছে, কথায় কথায় রাস্তায় হেঁটে বেড়াচ্ছে।
मैं समझता हूँ कि ये उनका निजी वर्षन है। बीजेपी का इसके साथ कोई संबंध नहीं है, और अगर निजी वर्षन भी होगा तो शायद दिलीप दा ऐसा ना ही कहते तो अच्छा है, क्योंकि इससे बीजेपी गवर्नमेंट्स यूपी में योगी जी ने बहुत सख्त कदम उठाए। जिन लोगों ने लोगों के पैसे से बनाए गए पब्लिक प्रॉपर्टी का नुकसान पहुंचाया, उनके ऊपर सख्त कार्रवाई कर रहे हैं। बंगाल में भी तो 2 साल पहले दीदी ने बहुत कुछ बोला था इसके बारे में, लेकिन कभी किसी के ऊपर कोई गोलीबारी ये सब जो है वो कभी नहीं हुआ है। तो किसी भी हालत में ये पार्टी की तरफ से बयान नहीं है, ये दिलीप दा का खुद का बयान है। तो क्यों उन्होंने कहा है, किस बलबूते पे कहा है, इसका जवाब दिलीप दा खुद देंगे।
Well, one of the things that has stood out in the protests against the Citizenship Act has been the opposition to it, like you saw in Shaheen Bagh earlier, from ordinary folks, from students and teachers to scientists, former bureaucrats. Many people have spoken out and many continue to do so. Last month, nearly 2,000 scientists and science students signed a public letter against the act, in which they basically said that we fear that the careful exclusion of Muslims from the ambit of the bill, it was a bill at that time, will greatly strain the pluralistic fabric of the country. Since then, however, reports have emerged that many institutes whose scholars signed that letter have been contacted by government officials wanting to confirm if they've actually put their signatures on it, and even asked for an explanation in some cases. The government's argument is that the service conduct rules say that no member of the service shall in any public utterance make any statement which has the effect of an adverse criticism of any policy or action of the centre or the state government. Interestingly, responding to a petition just last week, the Tripura High Court ruled that the participation of government employees in political rallies cannot be called a political activity or to be seen in violation of service conduct rules. Lawyers say that that order also stated that citizens, including students, journalists, and even government employees, hold the right to form their opinions. In October last year, an assistant professor at the Agartala Government Medical College was suspended for writing on social media against the Citizenship Amendment Bill at the time. Joining us on the program tonight is Dr. Suvrat Raju from the Faculty of International Centre for Theoretical Sciences in Bangalore, one of the scientists who had put his signature on that public letter against the Citizenship Act. We have Mr. Jawahar Sarkar, former CEO of Prasar Bharati, joining us tonight, and Ms. Lalita Kumaramangalam, member of the BJP and director of the India Foundation. Dr. Suvrat Raju, to you first. You put your signature on that letter against the Citizenship Act. Did you or your institute get questions then from officials in the government asking about, whether you had signed on and why?
So yes, I read the report in The Wire as well, which stated that the Secretary of the Department of Atomic Energy contacted the director of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, of which our institute is a part, and actually objected and said that this letter was participation in active politics. As a matter of fact, our institution is not governed by the Central Service civil rules, but there is a clause that says that you can't participate in active politics. And the idea that, this letter is in some sense a participation in active politics is just absurd, and it just shows the lengths to which the government is willing to go to try and shut down criticism of these policies.
It's interesting you say that. In a sense, is there a kind of a grey area with many, institutions and institutes, even like the IIMs and IITs, about what constitutes, what comes under service rules and what doesn't?
Well, different institutes have different rules that govern them. In particular, our institute doesn't have a clause that, takes into account the Central Service civil rules. But in any case, these civil service rules, it's been known for a long time, do not supersede Article 19 of the Constitution. And under Article 19(1), all of us do have the right to freedom of expression. And this is something that's been upheld and known for a long time. There's been criticism of the government and discussion of social issues coming from scientists and scientific institutions for many years. And this issue of these civil service rules. The civil service rules have many other provisions. They, for example, prohibit people from consuming alcohol in public places. And this provision of, shutting down criticism is perhaps the weakest on a legal ground. And in any case, many institutions just don't have it like ours. So there isn't even, any legal ground to try and ask scientists not to criticize these policies.
But as you say, the very fact that, the government's got ruffled by all of this and is, making inquiries, trying to find out, who signed the letter and, asking for explanations. You say it's a sign, that there is frankly, no tolerance of any kind of dissent or disagreement or criticism.
I think that's true, and I think that's becoming more and more manifest with every passing event that we see. I think another thing to highlight, which is perhaps what the government is also concerned about, is that it's a fact that the scientific community as a whole is a very apolitical community. Even sometimes when I have felt that scientists as a whole should speak out, people are unwilling to speak out. So it's also a measure of how uncomfortable people are with this policy that turns religion into a test for citizenship. And the fact that they've spoken out, speaks to very deep discontent. And I think this is something that the government also realizes. And this is the reason they would like to shut down this criticism and these voices.
It's very important what you're saying. I'd want to take that to Mr. Jawahar Sarkar, because what Dr. Raju is saying, Mr. Sarkar, is that this is different, and that scientists who don't normally take a position on controversial issues, felt the need to speak out because of just the way this act is structured. So, Mr. Sarkar, your thoughts on how this controversy is playing out, particularly with the government clearly bothered by those who are in these institutes and who are raising these questions.
I agree with what Dr. Raju has said about his institute not being under the central service rules. You see, we have to understand this central service or the All India service rules as a... Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
We can, sir. Go ahead.
So we have to understand these rules in the context of what they are meant to do. The hardcore central core of the central government is the part that is governed by the central service rules. Among about 50 lakh or so people employed by the central government directly or indirectly, a small part is directly governed under these rules. Most of the other central government aided institutes have their own rules. So number one, the fact is that this scientific institute has its own rule, and this rule doesn't apply to them. The prohibitory rule that applies to central government servants, it doesn't apply to them. So they are completely within their rights to express their opinion. Even within the central part of government, that means the ministries, the directorates, well, the central service conduct rules actually prohibit political activity, and they prohibit opposition to the government, opposition to government policies. Having said that, we need to define the areas, and definition can only come in when people make the first step. I have worked for over 40 years in government, 40 years plus, and I have never seen such spontaneous outburst against a government policy. I have seen lots of criticism of government, but I have never seen such a sustained all India spontaneous outburst against a government policy. Now, this government policy, the root of it lies in a non-democratic manner in which it was hustled through parliament, a parliament where there is a brute majority. Now, when the voice of the people is not heard through the institutional mechanism of parliament, that government faces these voices out in the unorganized streets. That's the way I look at it.
Right, right.
As a government, the central government should wake up. Should wake up to the fact that there's something very, very wrong in the manner in which they're conducting themselves.
Lalita Kumaramangalam, if I could ask you then that, as Dr. Raju was saying, that the government, it looks like the government is very nervous about any kind of criticism when it's looking for explanations as to why people signed an open letter against the Citizenship Act. And the Tripura High Court has said last week, as a government servant is not devoid of his or her right to free speech. So just your thoughts on that first, Ms. Kumaramangalam.
Yeah. First of all, Nidhi, let me say that the government is not nervous about criticism. We, the writers, are used to being criticized, vilified, various other terms could be used for many, many years now. So we're used to criticism. And there is no problem with democratic protests. But I am sure that everybody on this discussion will agree that when protests turn violent or when protests are often based on what are basically misinterpretations of an amendment in a law, not even a new law, then yes, there are problems that are arising because of that. Now, in the case of the participation of government servants, I think it's still open to interpretation, as Mr. Sarkar said. And I'd like to make it very clear that perhaps a certain amount of the opposition that we are seeing to the CAA is not organized, but a large part of it is extremely well organized and extremely motivated. If you increasingly hear the sort of slogans that are being raised, whether it's in the educational institutions or outside or in other places, they are very, very anti a particular community and of course very, very anti the Prime Minister. To say that a law, an amendment to a law that was passed by Parliament, just because we have 303 seats, the brute majority that Mr. Sarkar talked about was not manufactured by us. It was given to us by the people of India. And if the government is wanting now and is reaching out to try and listen to the protesters, isn't that what you all wanted in the first place? I don't think it's nervousness. I think it's the fact that the government is trying to reach out, but well, whether the other side is going to respond
except
or
how
not
are they
is
reaching
up
out?
to the
Can I
other
ask,
side.
ma'am, can I respectfully ask how exactly are they reaching out? Because, you know, it seems to be quite the opposite.
HRD ministry is in talks with JNU.
No, but the JNU was a different issue.
You asked me a question.
JNU, sorry, the JNU, ma'am, was a different issue.
is in talks with JNU. If that's
JNU was different because they were protesting against a fee hike, and then they had masked people, you know, coming into campus and beating up and assaulting students and faculty.
Against CAA subsequently.
Sure, but like for instance, the women of
Shaheen
Shaheen Bagh
are also protesting against CAA now. Initially, perhaps it was something else.
Sure, but ma'am, like for instance, the women of Shaheen Bagh who've been sitting there for nearly 30 days, we opened the program with that. Many of them are saying that all we want is for somebody in the government to come and talk to us. Now, they're not violent. They're not raising controversial slogans. They're peacefully protesting there. Now, I'm asking, do you not think that perhaps somebody needs to go and sit and talk with them and say, okay, we want to explain our point of view, because even that is not being done. And you're right, violent protests, mob violence is not justified at all. I'm talking about people like the women of Shaheen Bagh or even the scientists, government servants and others who've expressed their concerns peacefully.
Okay. Right. Now, in answer to that, let me give you one more fact. That is that which is very often I find ignored on most of the TV channels and the various other newspapers nowadays, the media itself. That is that as many people are writing letters of opposition to the CAA, there is an equal number of people who are writing in support of CAA to various functionaries, senior functionaries of the government, including the President of India and the Prime Minister. Having said that, let me also say that the women at Shaheen Bagh, yes, they've been protesting. But let's not forget that the women of Shaheen Bagh probably have been misinformed with regard to the fact that this bill is being called anti-women, and it is not. Let me give you the reason for that. Just give me 30 seconds and I'll explain to you. All forms of violence are principally, it is the women who suffer the most, whether it's religious, whether it's any other form of violence. If you see the torture that has been handed out and perpetrated against women, minority communities from these three Muslim countries that we are talking about, our neighboring Muslim countries, you will see the women are the worst out off. So when the CAA, the amendment that came in that says that we are going to fast track citizenship of people who came into India, entered India before a particular date, it's not anti-women, it's probably more protective towards women than others, if anything.
I haven't heard this sort of anti-women aspect of it. I haven't heard the anti-women aspect, because their problem seems to be with the... See, I don't
know why, because Sonia Gandhi herself has mentioned it.
Well, I don't know why, because Sonia Gandhi is not sitting at Shaheen Bagh, and if you listen to the women there...
Just give me 30 seconds,
ma'am, just 1 second, because I don't have much time. You see, the point is, I think... and Dr. Raju can add to this. Nobody who is opposing the Citizenship Act, as far as I can see, is saying do not give shelter to persecuted minorities from these countries. Nobody is arguing that they shouldn't be given shelter in India. I think the argument is that give it to all persecuted minorities and don't distinguish then and leave out one particular community. Dr. Raju.
I completely agree with this. In fact, the central point of our letter was that the idea of having religion as a test of citizenship and excluding Islam and including every other religion was what we felt was particularly problematic. You know, in the area that I work in theoretical physics, there's a very famous scientist, Abdus Salam, who was from Pakistan, a Pakistani Nobel laureate. And he had to leave Pakistan because he was an Ahmadiyya Muslim. And he clearly left because of religious persecution, but this is not, you know, the bill doesn't make any accommodation for people of this kind. And this is clearly discriminatory, and this is what we were protesting against. And I'd also like to say that the issue of violence and so on is really apart from the point, because the protests that I have been to and our letter were extremely peaceful. We are representing our viewpoint in a very peaceful and democratic manner. And it is a fact that the government is trying to shut down this criticism. For example, the article in The Wire that puts out a lot of this in the public domain indicated that very senior officials in the government were phoning up administrative officers at institutions and asking for explanations. And when this happens, this is clearly an intimidatory tactic. There are no two ways about it. And so I think you have to accept that the government is not willing to accept this criticism or deal with it in a democratic manner.
Ms. Kumaramangalam, an attempt to intimidate those who do speak up? I mean, a phone call.
First of all,
a phone call to seek explanations.
No,
is
quite the opposite.
Quite intimidating.
You will find that wherever you will find that. No, let me also say that the intimidation, if they claim it is happening and no proof has been provided of it, there is more than equal intimidation that our people are facing. We've had an MLA, we've had one of our senior leaders, he's not an MLA, in Kerala, who was totally thrashed because he was offering namaz and he is a member, he's a Muslim and a member of the BJP and therefore supporting the CAA. We've had our BJP office literally burnt to cinders almost in West Bengal. This is also intimidation. It's not the, you know, that they're giving us a pat on the back and saying we don't agree with you, but it's all right. How is that the same as government? Intimidation in any form, in any case, is wrong.
Okay, but you have a very respected scientist on this program saying that people like him who've spoken up do feel that there is an attempt to intimidate them for speaking up.
At Shaheen Bagh. At Shaheen Bagh, children below the age of 10 were used to shout slogans anti-Prime Minister, not so much anti-CAA, and extremely based on a very religious, sort of on a note that was very religious. And this is not protest. This is something that, I mean, I don't even want to use the word because it's a very offensive word to many people, including to me sometimes. So, but the fact is that today the CAA protests are nowhere near being as, if you want to put it straightforward, or just about a particular law. It has become more about, in many ways, trying to intimidate the government and certainly
so the government
trying to
feels intimidated.
Another community, which happens to be the majority community in this country.
Right. Yeah, Dr. Raju, and then I'll come to Mr. Sarkar. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it's very fallacious to say that the state can be intimidated. You know, the state holds the levers of power, and when the state attempts to perform intimidation, that's very different from some protesters shouting at somebody else. And I think the idea to set up some kind of equivalence between them is just very fallacious.
It was not
intimidation. I mean, you've been the chairperson of the National Commission of Women. You know that when the state takes into hand certain policies and tries to shut down dissent, that is a very significant step, and that's a very problematic step. It's very different from some protesters shouting at somebody else.
The state can also be intimidated. Let's not forget that.
Well, the state has the military power, the muscle power, the manpower, police power. But Mr. Sarkar, just a last word from you.
The point is, if the government,
Mr. Sarkar, if the government only, ma'am, 1 second, please do give everyone else a chance. Mr. Sarkar, the point is, if the government and the BJP are going to continue to see all protests as motivated protests, then we have a problem, because there is no acknowledgement of those protests which are genuine, that are genuine.
You see, Mrs. Kumaramangalam may not have handled protests, but we have had experience in handling protests all our lives. We know exactly which part of it, or we can guess exactly which part of it is subversive, which part of it is anti-government, and which part of it is an expression of angst, anguish. Now that's the point we are trying to make, that this one is an expression of anguish, it's an expression of popular anger, not at a hypothetical implementation of the NRC, which I think anyway will happen. but against what is considered to be a gross discrimination against a community that is an integral part of India. Now, that is why people like us, who are completely non-political, civil servants, scientists, professors, that's why we have come out to speak. And even as I speak to you, I know that I am being tailed, that I am being watched, that I will have to go through the retribution, because this government, if you don't mind my saying so, is the most vindictive one that we have seen after Mrs. Indira Gandhi. Second, the tragic part of it is that while this government introduced triple talaq, which I think is quite commendable, because you can't have men deciding the fate of the entire family just by, but they targeted Muslim women, and it's one of the greatest paradoxes of our contemporary history that it is Muslim women, the same women that they targeted, who are actually leading the most Gandhian struggles against this government. In simple words, what we need to do is to take stock of the situation, is not to go on needling people. Take stock of the situation and enter into a dialogue.
Okay, Ms. Kumaramangalam, last word.
A democracy means dissent. A democracy means dialogue.
Exactly. Ms. Kumaramangalam, I just have 30 seconds. You get the last word.
Yeah, Nidhi, with great respect to Mr. Sarkar, I'd like to say that I have handled a lot of, I was not always in the government. I've myself even been a part of many agitations when we've been fighting for women's rights. But that aside, the fact is that democracy is both dissent and dialogue. And what is happening now is dissent. But that's fine. It's a democratic right that people have. But what I object to is so much misinformation regarding the CAA. First of all, sir, I didn't interrupt you. Could you let me finish, please? Then you can comment. I have no problems with that. First of all, it's not ironic that the women that we tried to empower through the banning of triple talaq are today sitting in protest. They feel, and they have been given, they've been fed a huge amount of misinformation, which makes them feel that this law is actually anti-Muslim women, which it isn't. But that aside, there's nothing strange in this, one. And two, if people are being intimidated so much for criticizing the government, then how many TV channels and papers are carrying every day articles that are against what you all claim is a hegemony?
I'm completely out of time, but that conversation on intimidation is something I think we all need to have on another day, because we could go on for some time talking about that. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us. Thank you.